Declare open this public hearing of the Joint Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade, Defence Subcommittee, in relation to its inquiry into the Department of Defence Annual Report 2023-24. This hearing will be broadcast on the Parliament's website, and the proof and official transcripts of the proceedings will be published on the committee's website. I now welcome the representatives of the Australian Strategic Policy Institute to give evidence today, and a little later we will hear from Anduril Australia as well. For the Hansard record, would you please state your names and the capacities in which you appear before the Defence Subcommittee?
My name is Dr John Coyne and I am the Director of National Security Programs at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and I'm joined by...
I'm Raylene Lockhorse. I'm the Deputy Director of National Security Programs at ASPI.
Thank you very, very much. This hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite you to make an opening statement before we proceed to discussion.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep my comments relatively short on the basis that ASPI has previously provided evidence on our submission to the committee. I guess there are a couple of points that I would like to highlight for the committee in relation to defence spending and that part of Australia which we at ASPI call north of 26 degrees south, which is northern Australia. And that is, first off, that the defence budget represents a significantly different spend in the northern Australian economy. There are in fact two economies in Australia, that below north of 26 degrees south, where the economy operates like a fully developed nation, where there is capacity, where the market forces operate in their truest sense. And then there is the market that operates above north of 26 degrees south in northern Australia, where the capacity is smaller, where the flexibility is that little bit more difficult. As a result of that, how defence and how the federal government approach their activities in northern Australia needs to be done in a different way. The market needs to be signalled in a different way, so there is capacity. There needs to be broader engagement, especially in relation to multi-user facilities. My next comment relates more broadly to some of the questions in the previous Hansards, and that is that no doubt a committee like this is very much interested in whether or not spending is moving at pace in terms of preparing Australia and its national preparedness and defence capability. I think in terms of northern Australia and in terms of northern infrastructure, we are still stuck after a couple of years dealing with the challenges of the difference between more than 10 years notice of any future potential conflict and less than 10 years. The bureaucracy is still coming to terms in terms of their organisational culture and in terms of strategy of how that changes the nature of decision making. So, for example, in the maintenance of armoured vehicles, when you have more than 10 years' time to prepare for a major conflict, your decisions on where you maintain armoured vehicles are really based on cost. So that's okay that you truck armoured vehicles from Townsville down to Victoria to have them serviced and then you truck them back. It's okay when your allies say, can we store equipment in Australia? And you say, yes, you can put that in Albury-Wodonga because we have existing facilities there. The locus changes slightly when there's less warning time, where what's important is having defence capabilities and equipment maintained in location. And so in terms of Northern Australia, infrastructure, this changes the locus. So if the question is at the primary thing of this in terms of the preparation of Northern Australia for a range of contingencies, and we're not just talking about conflict here, we're talking about dealing with an era of continuous, concurrent and cascading risks and threats, so from Cyclone Fina through to the potential of great power competition, we're still not come to terms with how to best prepare for that at pace within defence.
Thank you very much, Mr Coyne. The committee has a few members here who were most recently in Darwin just last week, and prior to that the Joint Standing Offence Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade subcommittee undertook a program in London and a visit up to Kudu in Norfolk. and then into Poland to Warsaw to meet with similar committees and also Ukrainian representatives as well. So I think we can say across the committee we've got a sense of a very different pace of development in countries where the Russian threat is literally on the door front or inside the front door in the case of Ukraine, and the Australian context where I think you very clearly describe a cultural practice that's a peacetime dividend that's no longer sustainable in a new geostrategic reality. And we certainly started to get that sense from the people that we were taking evidence from. I note your submission number 19, I believe, is that correct? Submission 16?
16.
Thank you very much for an additional submission to this committee. Just so it's clear, we picked this up as an incomplete piece of work by the previous parliament, so we are completing that piece of work, and we appreciate your endurance in sticking with us and giving us a new perspective. But it's also quite timely because I'm getting the feeling that already some of the evidence that you gave on the 18th of February this year is now shifting, that there are changes underway, and that gives me some hope for where we are. So can I just go directly to your recommendations? And it picks up on what you've just said in your opening statement. You talk about the defence contributions to strengthening sovereign defence industry with tiered ecosystem of business set out in the DIDS, the Defence Industry Development Strategy, that will allow defence to better track and identify expenditure gaps in future DARS, Defence Annual Reports. What would that look like? Has there been a development in that kind of level of observation and accountability since you gave evidence on the 18th of this year?
I'll hand over to my colleague Raylene very shortly, but I would suggest that that's not the case, Chair. I came from earlier today from a industry conference, and what is very clear is that before that, and Raylene can talk to Indo-Pacific Maritime, the conference, one of Australia's largest defence conferences. Australia's small and medium enterprises in the defence sector are under incredible pressure and continue to be under incredible pressure. There are many announcements. There are many sort of signals for future activity. But at the end of the day, those sorts of signals don't allow Australian businesses to raise capital. They don't allow Australian businesses to hire people. They don't allow Australian businesses to purchase capability. So we really do need to be focused on that ecosystem of our Australian small and medium enterprises. At the core of that is greater clarity and transparency of how dollars will be spent, where they're spent. I call to you the example of this is in Northern Australia in terms of spend on infrastructure. For 9 years, running a Northern Australian Strategic Policy Centre, Defence has said it's spending $8 billion on infrastructure over 10 years. The $8 billion stays the same. The US will announce that it's spending money, then the announcement will be there's still $8 billion being over 10 years. Defence needs to provide greater clarity to industry so that it can future plan. The fundamental reason why Crowley, a US company, is able to build fuel storage in Darwin is because a multi-decade agreement has been struck between it and the US DoD to allow that investment. So we need to look at that, how to increase our commercial acumen, how to engage with our small and medium enterprises, and at the centre of that is clarity. Many in the construction industry will tell you they lament and want to go back to the days of the old Green Book, where Defence sort of outlines its infrastructure build over many years in absolute detail. Defence doesn't necessarily want to do that, and rightfully so, because things and priorities change, but we have to find a better middling ground with that. Raylene, I don't know if you want to add further to that?
Just before you jump in there, can I just ask you to compare what's happening with the submarine build and partnerships now established with shipbuilding entities by comparison to other parts of defence in terms of intersection with small and medium business, even primes?
Look, I mean, and I'm just trying to. If the question is the submarine enterprise going forward and having greater engagement with industry than perhaps other parts of defence industry, I think that is the case. Is that in itself, the submarine efforts, exemplary for Australian SMEs? Not yet. At the end of the day, if you're running an Australian small and medium enterprise, and I don't represent those, I'm from an independent policy think tank representing my perspectives, and Raylene will represent hers. But at the end of the day, to raise debt, to raise capital, to invest, announceables don't allow businesses to do that. Cash flow allows that to occur.
Sorry. I was just running a bit late, but you've got water and stuff, so you're all good.
Great, thank you. In your submission of the 18th of February, you wrote Defence, you said, Dr Bristow actually said, Defence still clings to excessive secrecy and assesses its own performance against its own targets when it's clearly not delivering the military power Australia needs anywhere near fast enough. He talked about accountability and transparency. He also talked about the different style of investments that are required, something similar to what you've just said. And he compared it to the Congressional Research Service reports, which allowed people to have some sort of sense of certainty about what was coming down the line so that they could do the capital raising that they needed to do, build the workforces, get the skills ready, etc. That's been sort of counterweighted with, well, we need to be able to respond in different ways at different times. Like if we become a drone creating facility, like that may well have a very short-lived usefulness for us. If we scale up too big, it becomes wasteful. But could you just talk to where the risk needs to be distributed? So I understand between the government's risk and managing that, and the financial risk, which is the critical motivator for the business, the enterprise partners.
Chair, look, I think that is an incredibly complex question, and really, it varies greatly by in a temporal sense, and it varies greatly by a sector and individual company sense. But what I would say is this: if you take the example of drones. And I might add, I'm giving my perspective. I'm not verbaling Dr Bristow, my colleague. At ASPI there is no central ASPI perspective. Its senior staff are engaged to have perspective, so I'm giving you my perspective on that basis. And that is that, when it comes to drones, what we've learnt from the example of the Ukraine is having a scalable industry base, having the people with the capability to rapidly develop new technology and an organisation that can absorb that at pace is incredibly important. Now, our Defence Force, our Special Air Services Regiment, as an example, and our commandos have proved that they can do that. So during the Afghanistan war, there was a shortage of capability, which was in bunker-busting missiles. We didn't have that capability. Defence rapidly acquired Javelin. It rapidly deployed it, teaching our Special Forces soldiers in the field how to use that capability. So we can do it in that specific example. In a broader sense, I think in terms of sharing that risk, we have now, with that less than 10 years, we have to work out how do we promote enough innovation onshore to be able to have that ecosystem to be able to scale up. Now, Defence is struggling with that concept because that won't naturally appear, whether we're talking infrastructure or whether we're talking drones, with normal market forces. But there are opportunities where we can look at whole of government spend, and we can look at this not just from a defence or a strict defence capability perspective. What we can look at it from is a national resilience and sovereignty perspective. And I think from my perspective, I will give you an indication of, or a case study again of that, in terms of national infrastructure and data. right now Telstra is building its intercity fibre cable capability, which will allow the rapid movement of data in Australia. We have a demand for that sort of capability in Northern Australia. It's being built between multiple cities, but the challenge is how will it be built between Adelaide and Darwin? There were some who will say, well, that's a private sector problem. There are others who will turn around and say, well, government should chip in and pay. But perhaps there's a middling ground in managing that risk, which is the existing government spend on bandwidth, for example, for data processing could be used to underpin a project like that. So it requires strategic imagination and it requires flexibility. So I do think that in managing that risk, these are the things we want an innovative nation that will be key if there were a future conflict, but it'll equally be key, as we've seen in parts of Northern Australia over the last 72 to 96 hours with Cyclone Fina.
There's a lot to unpack here. I'm going to go now, give the call to Mr Boyce, and I'll follow with Ms Clutterham. Please just let me know if you have questions.
Thank you for appearing between us. Just in the interest of allowing all of my colleagues to ask questions, I will only ask one, and what I want to go to is one of your recommendations in respect to fast-tracking the acquisition of hypersonic missiles. In the last parliamentary term, this committee visited a ramjet hypersonic missile facility up in Brisbane that was developing this technology. We were told that those missiles were something in the order of $50 million a shot, and that is without launch vehicles and so forth. So the point I'm trying to make here is that if you are to fast-track hypersonic missile technology, it all becomes a question of economics. The question I have for you is how many hypersonic missiles do you need to have as an active deterrent? Do we need 10 shots? Do we need 100 shots? Do we need 1,000 shots? Obviously, you would need a significant investment into that. And again, recently, members of this committee have travelled to Poland and spoken to the Polish government, etc., on the Russia-Ukraine influence there, and they are devoting 5.5% of their GDP to defence industry and general defence spend. So, again, if we are to fast-track hypersonic missile technology, how will that affect the economics of that? What is the number that we need? Do you have a projection on what the government needs to spend in terms of GDP for defence spend?
Look, Deputy Chair, thank you for that question. There's often talks around GDP and in an absolute sense in terms of spending. Like how much should we spend as a percentage of GDP? I suspect that is the wrong question. I suspect the question here is how much we can afford, for starters. I think the second one is what actual deterrence and capability do we want? So it's a rough argument, and I'm the first to advocate as a think tanker. One of the great things about our democracy is that we can have, there are multiple perspectives, and one of the great weights of being in government is having to make the decision of the compromises of what you will and won't do. So I think it's the wrong question to sit there and put it in an absolute sense that if we get to 3 point something or we get to 3% of GDP, we'll be ready and we'll be okay. I don't think that is the right way. What we want to be able to do is have a meaningful deterrent capability, and we have to, in doing so, make very difficult choices about what capabilities we do and don't take on. As I said earlier, the submission itself was written by a number of my colleagues. It represents each of their original opinions, and certainly we can take some of those questions on notice. I don't think there is an absolute... I don't think anyone could tell you in a factual, scientific way right now what number of hypersonic missiles Australia would specifically need. I think to do so is almost wet one's finger and put it in the air, Deputy Chair. And so I don't think there is a specific answer to that. What we can say, though, is that we do need, which we have a shortfall on, which is a meaningful way to deter enemies and potential adversaries in our approaches. But even in all of these capabilities, you can have the best missiles in the world, but when you fire them all, and you can't manufacture any more, or you can't do maintenance on them, or you don't have the data to be able to target, it's that systems of systems thinking around defence that becomes important, not single capabilities. And I think a great deal of focus goes into single capabilities as opposed to how do we build systems of systems that better defend our country, that build national resilience, that maintain our sovereignty. And these are very difficult questions to ask because from a bureaucratic perspective, and Deputy Chair, I have served in the public service and in the military for a total of 25 years before joining the Australian Strategic Policy Institute for the last decade. So I have great sympathy for the difficult choices that government and the bureaucracy need to make, but those are the difficult choices that they must make. And right now, in some ways, when we're talking about specific capabilities, it makes me desperately uncomfortable thinking about our time in the 1990s when we cut the back end of defence to such a significant level because we wanted to focus on capabilities that was to our detriment. So in 1999, when I deployed to East Timor, we'd privatised so much that our soldiers didn't get fresh food on the ground for some in excess of 14 days because we'd lost that capability. So I would put the real question here is the system of systems working, not whether or not we get the right number of missiles. I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Yeah, I think it's, the deterrence is really important, but equally it's our preparedness and our resilience to bounce back from that, and that's where we're lacking in terms of the estate and in terms of logistics and supply chains and just-in-time supply chains.
I guess the point I'm trying to take away from this is that everybody must realise that if we are going to fast-track this sort of hypersonic technology, it will take a significant economic investment to have that capability.
And Deputy Chair, I think that is the right mindset to have in regards to this. I think it's very easy in the public debate to write commentary around specific capabilities extracted from the realities of treaty negotiations with the countries who have those capabilities, the construction of industries, for instance, with all of that, there is at times global shortages in ammonium percolate, and which is solid rocket fuel, and we can't manufacture it in Australia for a whole range of issues. So you are absolutely right, and that is why, if anyone is advocating for single capability solutions, I don't think that that's necessarily the right answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Ms Clutterham, followed by Mr Batt, and then Mr Zapier.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have two questions. The first one, I just wanted to go back to the discussion we're having about the need for stronger signalling with the pipeline of work from Defence, and I wondered what your thoughts were on businesses sort of taking the plunge, as it were, with a pipeline, given the outcomes that many businesses experienced in terms of loss of thousands and thousands of dollars after attack class got cancelled. So a lot of entities spent thousands pre-qualifying themselves and investing in workforce planning, infrastructure, etc., only to be out of pocket when that program was cancelled. What do you think the appetite is, given that history, to invest in workforce?
We'll get your answer on the
Am I saved by the bell?
You're saved by the bell.
No,
Yeah.
no, keep going. Please go ahead with your answer. It'll be recorded.
No worries. I think... I think, Chair, that Australia's SMEs have been hit pretty hard, and sometimes even the figures even the figures of thousands or tenths of thousands isn't quite true. So, you know, in some of the tenders that were called off leading into the development of the national, with the Defence Strategic Review, then the National Defence Strategy, some businesses lost millions of dollars. And it, you know, through bids and bid teams and all the preparation. Now, quite often I hear that you know, that's not lost, that money's lost by the company but not lost by government. But the fact of the matter is government will eventually pay for that down the track, or shareholders will pay for that down the track, or future customers will pay for that down the track. So the reality is starting a tender process, yanking it, and has real impacts on our economy, real impacts on businesses. Now, when it comes to small and medium enterprises, that impact is even more significant. So quite often, you know, I speak to defence officials and they'll say, you know, defence is a customer of choice. I would put it to you, for many Australian SMEs, defence is no longer a customer of choice.
So I think...
Locust.
Yes, so with stronger signalling. So I think in May this year, so after we presented in February, ASPI released the Cost of Defence report, budget brief, and we also released an election report, Agenda for Change. And we've talked about transparency in there quite a lot. And I've spoken about this quite actively in conferences and in Northern Australia, that the transparency is becoming less and less every year. It's very hard to interpret the annual reports and to reconcile them against the defence budgets. There are no clear KPIs to measure against. It says, you know, defence is 80% on track, but you know, there's nothing underneath that. And what we find with industry, and particularly with the construction industry, which is my background, is that we need stronger signalling and longer signalling. The next 3-4 years in the IIP isn't enough, particularly for the smaller companies. They need to know, you know, what's the next 10 years, and we need to be developing programs of work and not, you know, small tenders all the time. That comes with the risk of, you know, having these panels where you only go to the chosen few, you know, major contractors, and then the smaller ones miss out. I think for smaller SMEs trying to get into defence, the problems are the long tendering times, the cost of tendering, the barriers to security, so getting a DISP security clearance and then getting personal security clearances. I believe that it's, you know, now nearly 18 months for a NV clearance, and a baseline which should be fairly simple.
How many months?
I will have to go and check the facts, but I believe it's up to 18 months. And then there's issues with dual nationalities, and so we're limiting our pool, and things like that can be fixed by siloing projects. Not everyone has to have access to everything in a project, so you can get, you know, the best researchers and other people, you know, workforce. But defence is no longer the customer of choice because they're not giving 5-10 years of work or pipeline. So a company is not willing to invest in the workforce, and particularly in remote locations, they're relying on FIFO, fly-in, fly-out workers, which ultimately increases the cost of the project delivery. And it's not investing in regional Australia in capability and long-term commitment there.
And Chair, look, I'd reiterate that as well. I guess I've attended a number of industry briefings, and for a little while there were these wonderful statements to Australia's SMEs who were interested in defence, and they'd go, you know, and it's an old military saying, you know, you need to be battle fit, you know, your organisations need to get battle fit to work with us. But that's only partially true. It's in Australia's interest to have a burgeoning SMEs in this country that have real capability, both in terms of defence but also in terms of our economy. So, yes, SMEs have got to step through all of those processes. But defence should also be, as the rest of the government, should also be encouraging those businesses and assisting them getting through those processes so that we have the right ecosystem here. The other part that I would highlight for you in it is that this also has to be looked through a geographical sense. So, you know, if defence in Sydney changes the tender. It affects individual businesses. But in the case of the Northern Territory, where defence spend represents approximately 8% of their GDP, it has an economic and, I would suggest, a moral obligation, an ethical obligation to actively engage in the economy and actively engage with industry there. And I would go as far, and I'm on the record for saying this, is in any location, Townsville is another good example, where it represents about 5% of the GDP. It has that obligation as well.
Thank you very much. So, extensive answer. One more question?
Yeah, I did have one more, if that's okay. Thank you. I will read the transcript of that answer. I did note in the summary of your submission reference to 5 Virginia-class submarines and the need to procure those given the long lead times with SSN AUKUS. And I just wondered what your thoughts were. My sense is that you don't think that the LOAT program with respect to the CCSMs is going to be good enough or provide us with the capability that we need, hence your suggestion for 5 Virginia-class.
I'm happy to take that one on notice for one of my learned colleagues at ASPE who specialises in submarines and the acquisition of submarines. I guess from a general sense, I go back to my response to the Deputy Chair's question earlier. You know, it's about impact and systems, not necessarily about absolute numbers of, so, you know, is it 5 submarines, 7 submarines in 20 years, 4 in 30? You know, at the end of the day, it was uncrewed maritime vessels that forced, or that was used by the Ukraine to force the Russians to move their fleet out of the Black Sea. So I guess my viewpoint is probably somewhat divergent in the sense that I think that we should be looking at our strategic intent, the effects that we're trying to achieve, and not necessarily, you know, is it 4 or 5 submarines?
So on notice would be great, just about my question about the Collins-class LOAT program and its effectiveness.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Batt, you've got the call.
Thank you, Chair. During our visit up last week to Robertson Barracks, there was a lot of talk from one brigade about their transformation into littoral operations. So I just wanted to ask you about your thoughts on any issues and opportunities in relation to that transformation up there and how they should be managed by Defence.
When Defence made the decision to move, and I don't have the exact number here, but when it made the decision to move some 18 months ago, 700 troops from South Australia to Townsville, and in doing so didn't engage with the local government and didn't engage with the state government, and that has continued to say that the movement of that number of soldiers over a period of about a year or two won't have an impact on local housing. Secondly, is my viewpoint is that stands as a visionette. I think that Defence needs to actively engage with that move. There is certainly some very mixed messages in the Northern Territory. Some saying that, you know, Defence doesn't have the money to build amphibious bases and capabilities for basing its new amphibious vessels. What vessels will go to Darwin? One group is saying that it'll be that they'll be moored off moorings in the harbour, but there's been no engagement with that. Others are saying that no, don't worry about that, that's not true. They'll be permanent. I think there's a lack of clarity if we're talking about the community, and we're talking about a town or a city, I should say, that is actively supportive of, at a government in the Northern Territory that is actively supportive of Defence. Okay, so Defence spends 8% of their GDP. So the Northern Territory government is interested in making sure and engaging with Defence. Local industry is interested in engaging with Defence. multi-generationally, there's great support for defence in the Northern Territory, and there's a broader understanding historically of the importance of Northern Australia and Darwin to the defence of Australia. So they're a captive audience. So my viewpoint is that littoral capability shift needs to really focus on engagement with the community. Secondly, it needs to look for opportunities of how we can create more with less through cooperation. There is no better training grounds in the world, and I say that without fear of being corrected on it. For instance, for fifth generation warfare capability like Delamere Range, it's a tough training environment. One of the reasons the US Marine Corps like going to Darwin, like going to the Northern Territory, because it's not easy. It's hard to train, it's a hard environment, and it prepares their Marines for future combat. So there's a great opportunity here for us to sit there and look at how can we build a collaborative environment for amphibious and littoral operations training, be it joint training centres, be it joint training activities, not just with the US here, but also in the broader region. And it need not just be about high-end warfighting, it can just be as importantly focused on humanitarian and disaster relief aid.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'll give the call now to Mr Zapier.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr Coyne, thank you for your presentation. Sorry I missed your opening remarks because I was out, but I caught the tail end of them, which sort of links in with your answer that you just gave just a moment ago, as to how so many different people in defence seem to go in different directions and have different views about what ought to be done and what shouldn't be done. And you used a good example of the trucking earlier on. My question to you is this: why is it that there is not, in my view, one strategic coordinated view about what our priorities should be and how whatever money is allocated is best spent?
Look, I think there is a coordinated view if we look to the Defence Strategic Review, parts of which were accepted by government, parts of which weren't. I think the National Defence Strategy has a degree of clarity. But we're also talking about incredibly complex capabilities in a fast-moving environment with significant challenges. And I think from that perspective, it makes it very, very difficult to make a definitive... And if we're talking here around, why, the first part of that question, why isn't there more consensus amongst people? Well, for starters, because the lens through which they look at these problems are all different. So from my perspective, and I'm unapologetic about it, I believe in the importance of strategic geography. I believe in the importance of national ecosystems and the ability of our nation to be resilient as just as important as having specific capabilities. In stark contrast, there's those that believe that this all hangs off the idea of being able to maintain the US relationship. For others, it's about nuclear submarines. For others, it's about long-range fires. I think, though, that ultimately difficult decisions need to be made, and the solution to all this. And ironically, I do a great deal of work in the national security space across the globe, and I've never met an organisation that has ever said anything more than we need more money.
Thanks, Chair.
Fantastic. Ms Jarrett, you have the call.
Thank you. I'm just going to go in a slightly different direction, looking more at defence cooperation and competition. And I noticed that in your submission you talk about denying China strategic access in the Pacific, but I'm thinking not just looking at capability and deterrence capability, but more broadly at Australia and where we sit. And I'm just wondering, and what we're doing, and I'm just wondering, are we focusing... Have we got the emphasis on the right areas of focus? And maybe what else could we be doing in terms of interoperability with strategic partners? It's a big question, I appreciate that.
No, there are no easy questions when you're in rooms like this. But look, do we have the mix right? I think we need to understand, and I'll approach this slightly different because I'll talk about, because a number of different countries across the region operate constabulary and police and not military capability, not defence capability. What sets the contribution of Australia in the Pacific for instance, in the policing space, isn't buying weapons, it isn't buying capability. It's providing a style of policing that is focused on serving the community and not keeping governments in power. So what I mean by that is it's not focused on authoritarian policing, it's focused on community policing. What our nation brought to the Pacific Islands during its deployments was a style of policing that was focused on community policing. Okay, and that set us apart. We have a number of very strong connections into the Pacific region for which we should be proud of. We have the world's largest diasporic PNG community in Cairns. We have every boat captain in the Pacific goes to a training establishment in Cairns to learn to be a boat captain. Okay, so we have people coming here all the time. We have our businesses doing work into the region. If you have an understanding, don't get me wrong, nations across the Pacific will and do indeed take all aid that is given to them, but there is a strong cultural affinity, and culture is important. And there is a strong cultural affinity that goes across business, it goes across law enforcement, and it goes across diaspora. And that connection is multi-generational. We've had success in Bougainville, we've had success in the Solomon Islands, and we have that strong tradition. The second point I'd make in answering it is that, if I present, which I have the opportunity through on a number of occasions, the leadership courses from the Pacific Island countries in law enforcement and in the military. When we're talking about existential threats, they will consistently tell you the number one existential threat to their nations is climate change, and the secondary flow-on effects from that. And so I think this is where Australia can set itself apart in that competition in a way that is not directly trying to do checkbook activities, nor is it necessarily militarising the region. Maritime security is important to Pacific Island countries, not just because it's of global power competition, but because of illegal, unreported and underreported fishing. It's equally important because of transnational serious organised crime. So I think we have an amazing role to play there in all of those spaces that need not just be about securitising and not be about more military training in that military sense. But there's certainly room for greater cooperation, and there's certainly a demand for that cooperation. I recently wrote a chapter for a book for the previous South Pacific Police Defence Ministers meeting. And there are a number of opportunities for us to continue to engage in this space, both with the direct security impacts of climate change, but also those broader impacts across transnational serious organised crime in a way that other nations, including China and the US, are not.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Coyne, your analysis on North Australia calls for a reframing of the region to prioritise economic success, which was something you alluded to in your opening remarks. But you add in your submission that it's a foundation to build strategic deterrence by creating this economic capacity in the north. What do you think of Australia's current northern defence pivot?
It is uneven. It's not moving at pace. It's quite often there is a deep resistance to it, Chair. People no longer they no longer say it's too hot, too far, and too expensive, but they'll say it behind closed doors. The fact of the matter is that I believe, through my research and my work, that an economically and socially prosperous Northern Australia is a secure Northern Australia. It creates exactly the kind of scalable industry base, exactly the kind of infrastructure that drives economic growth and the growth of our nation, but it also provides the scalable industry base to support any potentiality in terms of military operations. And without that, we won't be prepared. Secondly, and I think this is just as important, which is that there's various arguments about defence spend, and I don't think a dollar spent on defence, it will be very hard to prove that a dollar spent on defence will cause and create a dollar of activity in our economy. But we do also need to look at the opportunities of how do we harness around this defence spending. So, for instance, if it's in the interest of defence to have a maritime maintenance capability at Middle Arm in Darwin, and it's in the interests of mining to have it there, and it's the interests of the Northern Territory government to have it there. How do we pull together all of those things to make sure that we're growing these communities in that part of Australia? And I think that is of critical importance.
You, in your analysis, proposed some rather long-term solutions. You've also impressed on us today the need for a clearer and more transparent brief from the Department of Defence so that there can be a more timely and appropriate response as well. So there's these two timelines operating at the same time. You reference a case study from Northern Australia, such as Qatar, for Northern Australia, such as Qatar and UAE. What's the timeline for this plan, and what are some of the ideas for interim success in the short and medium term?
Look, I think, Chair, when I wrote that report, what I was trying to say there is that our north is as rich in resources, not necessarily oil, but as rich in other resources as Qatar and the UAE. Yet when we look at the economy and compare the economies of Northern Australia versus the economies of our southern states, we start seeing real disparity. We see a lack of investment. And there are a whole heap of reasons for that, not the least of which is the number of votes that are available in that part of the world. Without sounding cynical, I should say. But separate from that, I think my argument here is we're a powerful nation in our own right, a middle power. We need to be able to chew gum and walk at the same time. I use that phrase because I made a comment very similar to or your question to a politician some years ago, and that was the response they gave me. And at the time, I was shocked by it. And I thought about it. I said, we can do that. We can play this short game. We have to play. And this is part of the challenge for defence. This is part of the challenge for our economy and building our nation, which is we do have to do things in the short term and we have to do things in the long term. So, and we have to find the balance between the two. But for my mind, we're making some progress with NAIF, but we need to have a whole-of-nation approach or a whole-of-government approach to Northern Australia. Far too much of the money and effort that's being spent is being spent in silos. I return back to, how is it that... So we've got NAIF money going to Northern Australia, we've got money being talked about in relation to critical minerals and rare earth elements. We've got money going in for national resilience, the NRF, and defence represents that 8% of GDP. That's a lot of spend. So how do we build that together to do the short game and the long game? And in the meantime, how do we make sure that those great innovators, my understanding is you've had a presentation from Speed 3D Printing.
We did.
They are fantastic Australian innovators. They would not be where they are now if they weren't able to pour their own equity in and outlast very difficult situations. So rather than being supported, they had to fight the system all the way. So how do we unlock that great Australian innovation in Northern Australia? And so we've got the spend. I'm not imploring we have to spend more, but we have to spend more wisely and ensure that we're linking these things up. So my viewpoint is quite clear, which is, and I've written this and published it, which is, I know it's outside or semi-outside the scope of this committee, but it does relate to defence capabilities, which is if we can create a northern industrial hub in Middle Arm that is feeding critical minerals to a number of different markets, that is creating and developing data centres and AI centres, and that's supporting defence, it's hard to find someone or the downside of who that won't help.
I'm somewhat heartened that you think that there's possibilities that things could change, but my overall sense is there's a lot going on, but it's all happening quite blind to other parts that are happening, and there is no overarching coordination to bring the national interest forward in a more strategic way, despite the National Defence Strategy existing?
Look, I think that's a fair... I wouldn't say I'm Pollyanna about it, but I would say, look, at times I can be quite cynical about the situation. There is a lot going on. It is not necessarily all impacting in the short term. Nothing like your 12-year-old ringing you in the middle of giving evidence. Apologise. So, look, from my perspective, there are opportunities here. It does require a whole-of-nation response. And ironically, you know, the very siloed nature of portfolio budget statements and budgets means that it's incredibly difficult to bring those together. And for any of those who've served as ministers, nothing's more challenging than an interdepartmental committee and negotiating how to bring policy together.
Okay, we've got our next witnesses here. Mr Newman, did you need to ask one?
No, Dr Coyne, whether you've done any work, ASPI's done any work in relation to that resilience and demographic shifts. I mean, you look at Australia at Federation, we had 4 million people. New South Wales made up, 40% of the population of Australia. And South Australia was the third biggest in population in the country. But now Western Australia's moved ahead, Queensland's moved way ahead. You think about there's only a million of us north of the Tropic of Capricorn, and the Northern Territory has fewer people than my home city of Ipswich. Okay? So how do we, and I'm interested in you doing some work in this space, because I think there's a real role for you to do it. It's picking up the resilience and demographic shifts. How can we secure the north? And you talked about the siloed stuff with the NAIF, and the NAIF is now back on track, I think. But are you, or do you propose to do that? Because there's some work on resilience and improving the demographic shift to the north. We've done it in our country historically, West Australia, Queensland. Northern Territory hasn't done it. But if we're going to defend ourselves, and we found in World War II that we were completely in trouble in Darwin and places like that, then surely organisations like yours, respected organisations like yours, should play a leading role in how we can get a whole-of-government approach here to link in defence with the demographic development of Northern Australia. Because I think there's a role for you to play there, John. I really do think that.
And look, the short answer we have, we're pushing in different areas. So I have an Army Research Centre grant that's looking at workforce and logistics challenges. The workforce ones are the interesting ones for soldiers going to Townsville and to Darwin. So that at that sort of really micro level. At the macro level, I do want to say I should have added this in. For the committee, for those who don't have constituents in Northern Australia, our people in Northern Australia, I'm from Emerald and Central Queensland originally, so I'm not parochially Northern Australian, I'm a Central Queenslander, but they're more resilient than most of our people in the southern states. So, you know, like, people in Darwin regularly every year deal with the fact that their main supply routes, so road and rail, are cut off in multiple places as a result of weather events. And they chip in together and they make that happen. Go to Cairns, North Queensland, where you've had multiple weather events over a consecutive series of years, and see how those people are coming together. So they're very resilient populations. The level of innovation out of smaller populations is really quite strong. We have 3 really strong universities in Northern Australia through JCU, CDU and CQU. So we've got some of those components. The livability one is one of those challenges. You know, it is very different. You know, migration has played an important role in that as well. If you sit there and talk to people in Alice Springs, without migration, the medical services there wouldn't work. But there's also livability issues in general. So, for instance, there is no private maternity ward in Darwin anymore. So if you want to have a young woman wants to have a baby in the private system, then they have got to fly to another state. So some very real challenges in terms of that livability component to build that next level of population. The distances and the cost of flights It's another example of that. So when people want family, and they relocate to Darwin. That idea that you've got to take a 4.5-hour flight back to get to Brisbane, for some people that's a long way. It is a long way. If you ask the Americans, they think it's a long way as well. So I think you are right. That research in terms of livability,
you can do a lot of work. The cyclone reinsurance pool's another issue.
Absolutely, and we have dealt with the reinsurance pool, and we're providing feedback into there. I also have a climate security centre that looks at a number of these issues. So look, I'm committed to building and addressing these issues in Northern Australia. I do believe that an economically, socially prosperous Northern Australia is a secure one, and I believe that next generation of growth, Shane, through investment, through economic growth, not just through extractive, but also through manufacturing, is critical to that region, and it has real opportunities.
We look forward to seeing your report, John, in some stage in the future. I think it's good for you to do.
And I just note on that closing point there, the Northern Australia Securing a Developing Economy and to Secure a Developed Nation is out as of August this year. And you talk about 3 phases: strategic alignment 2026, localisation leverage 27 to 29, and national integration 29 to 35. So we might be able to integrate some of that consideration into our report. Yeah. This is quite strong work for our purposes as well as the national interest. So can I thank you very much, Dr. Coyne and Ms. Lockhurst, for coming here to give us your views as part of ASPI. You made it very clear that you're not speaking in entirety for the entire entity of ASPI. So we wish you well in your studies, and we may call on your capacities again in the near future.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I remind you that you'll also get a copy of the transcript of your evidence. You'll have an opportunity to request corrections to any transcription errors and, if possible, any questions on notice or further information by the 5th of December. Thank you very much. I now invite representatives of Anduril to come forward.
Good evening.
Hello and welcome, Mr. Goodrich.
Thank you so much.
Can I just indicate that we are really pleased that you're able to join us to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, could you please state your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Yes, I'm David Goodrich and I'm the Executive Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Anduril Australia and Anduril Asia Pacific.
This hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard. It attracts parliamentary privilege. I now invite you to make an opening statement before we proceed to discussion.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to appear here today before you. As I said, my name is David Goodrich and I'm the Executive Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Anduril Australia and Asia Pacific. We're a defence technology company committed to delivering advanced autonomous systems, AI-enabled command and control systems and next-generation capabilities for Australia, our allies, at scale and affordably compared to traditional defence capabilities. Dr. Shane Arnott and I started Anduril Australia 4 years ago, and we've now grown to over 250 Australians across 4 offices and facilities in 3 states and territories. Globally, Anduril has grown in the last 8 years to over 8,000 people in 51 offices and facilities around the world. My remarks tonight will focus on the importance of shared risk-taking, genuine co-investment and efficient procurement processes to ensure that defence can deliver capability at the pace required in today's challenging geopolitical strategic environment. Through the Ghost Shark program, which is Australia's extra-large autonomous undersea capability, co-developed by Anduril and Defence, we've demonstrated that when government and industry share risk, co-fund and have a common commitment, remarkable outcomes can follow. Under the initial 3-year $140 million 50-50 co-funded development contract, the Anduril team delivered the first prototype Ghost Shark vehicle 12 months ahead of schedule. I'll say that again, 12 months ahead of schedule. And we completed the overall 3-year program on budget, and we met or exceeded all of the delivery and capability milestones set for us. This is extraordinary given that the team that delivered that did not exist when I signed the contract on the 5th of April 2022. So we built the team and then we engaged with our partners in defence and we delivered ahead of schedule and on budget. The Ghost Shark program has now successfully transitioned from that prototyping phase into a $1.7 billion program of record, which will deliver dozens and dozens of continually updated Ghost Sharks for the Royal Australian Navy over an initial 5-year period, with the first Ghost Shark being handed over to the Navy in January of next year, which is only 3 months since we've signed the program of record contract. I think most people would agree that this is a significant sovereign industrial achievement and something that I think we all as Australians can feel justifiably proud. I'm often asked about how the success of Ghost Shark can be replicated more broadly across defence. The answer is that the success was made possible because all parties, the Royal Australian Navy, the Defence Science and Technology Group, the Advanced Strategic Capabilities Accelerator and Anduril, took on risk and invested in making the program successful. For our part, Anduril invested hundreds of millions of dollars of its own capital, accepted all of the performance risk under a firm fixed price, fixed time contract, and in association with that investment, took the decision, the very courageous decision, to build and establish an at-scale production facility in Sydney, including emboldening and investing in 42 Australian SMEs as part of our Australian supply chain, 18 months ahead of signing the contract that would be the subject of that factory. If you think there were a few sleepless nights, you would be absolutely correct. Now, I guess the question for government is, could this be something that other companies in Australia are willing to do? From my almost 40 years of experience running private companies in Australia and around the world, I think that industry is willing to lean in to invest the capital that is required to deliver defence innovation and at-scale manufacturing capabilities if Defence's procurement and contracting systems are agile, streamlined and commercially sensible. Given the current and critical geopolitical uncertainties that we face in this region and around the world, production capacity is deterrence, and the factory is the new weapon that we need as a nation. Defence does need to, and I think recognises the need, to modernise its acquisition framework. Procurement and contracting processes that are designed historically for large, long lead time, cost-plus programs for capabilities like frigates and submarines are simply not suited to fast-moving software-based technologies such as autonomous systems that use artificial intelligence, machine learning and computer vision, which need to be updated continuously to meet the changing threats. And we've seen how fast these threats change in theatres like the Ukraine and in the Middle East. There is no such thing anymore as a one-size-fits-all approach to defence contracting. A new procurement model is needed, and it's one that supports the speed to capability, iterative capability development and continuous technology insertion, supported by shared investment, aligned incentives between government and industry. If companies take risk and they deliver successfully, they must be rewarded with substantial contracts that allow investors in those companies to earn a market-based return on the risk that they have taken. If Australia is to deter a great power aggression in the coming decade, we have to move beyond the risk aversion that is baked into legislative instruments like the PGPA Act, Commonwealth procurement rules, and the threat of an ANAO audit, which leads to an allergic reaction to sole source contracts. The reality is that tendering is expensive for industry, and it isn't the only way to ensure that value for money, necessary value for money, is achieved, or does it always encourage innovation? We need to move towards a more balanced approach between these traditional and appropriate contracting models for large programs and sensible risk-taking, where innovation, co-investment, speed to capability and sovereignty are acknowledged as part of that process and rewarded for taking risk. And these things are not constrained by well-intentioned bureaucratic processes. So we have 4 recommendations for the committee this evening, Chair. Firstly, we recommend that there needs to be a strengthening and an enlivening of collaborative, trust-based partnerships with industry, where industry shows that they deserve this. Secondly, we need to focus on delivering shared operational outcomes rather than using rigid, slow, over-detailed and over-documented specifications which are often out of date before they are even issued. Thirdly, we need to encourage industry co-investment models that make industry genuinely accountable and incentivised to invest their own capital by guaranteeing that they will be awarded a commercially viable and a commercial scale contract if they succeed. Now, there are 2 sides to that coin. The other side of the coin is that if we don't succeed, we should suffer the pain and financial loss associated with that process. So we are rewarded if we do succeed. If we do not succeed, we should not be bailed out by the taxpayer. And finally, we need to plan, government needs to plan for at-scale production and budget fully for the program of record that would follow a successful prototyping phase to ensure a smooth transition between the prototyping phase and the at-scale production commencement to avoid the risk of slipping into that well-described category or component of a company's nightmare, which is the valley of death between those 2 phases. Anduril Australia is ready to grow and expand our partnership with Defence across all domains, not just the maritime domain, to help build a strong and enduring sovereign defence industrial base for our nation. Anduril has proven that Australian industry can deliver the autonomous capabilities that our nation will need in the event of a global conflict. If we think innovatively, if we act decisively, and if we contract efficiently. I welcome any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Goodrich. If I can, there's so many questions to ask, but first of all, can I congratulate you on that program, the Ghost Shark? In Australia, I think that this is a really important case study for us to understand and get our teeth into. So one of the roles of this committee is to get into the public place and understanding of what we are doing in terms of investment in the nation's defence. So can you just, give us a layman's version of what is the Ghost Shark, why do we need it, and why did your company take the risk to invest, and how much did you invest?
The Ghost Shark is an extra-large autonomous undersea vehicle, an autonomous submarine. It is a capability that can necessarily be produced at scale at a very low cost compared to a crewed submarine. And as a result of the autonomy that is built into the software that is embodied within the Ghost Shark, it can do very, very long missions that are a subset of the missions that a crewed submarine can do. And because it doesn't have human beings in it, and because it's much, much, much lower cost, you can use these autonomous submarines to do the dull, dirty and dangerous activities where you would not want to put our sailors in harm's way. So they can get a lot further forward into the areas of concern, and they can communicate between each other in such a way that they provide a formidable deterrent to adversaries who would seek to send their own extremely expensive crewed submarines into our area of operations. Australia has over 37,000 kilometres of coastline, which is an enormous coastline. We're a very small population, relatively speaking, and a relatively speaking small defence force. So the use of autonomous systems for a country like Australia is extremely logical. And that is the reason why Andrew decided to propose to the Royal Australian Navy that we would co-develop a capability that could be produced by Australians, engineered and designed and tested by Australians, but then manufactured in Australia for the Royal Australian Navy, and then subject to government approval for export to our allies and partners around the world. We've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in this program by firstly acquiring the core intellectual property in the United States. We are a United States-based company. As I said, I set up Anduril Australia in Australia 4 years ago, and the Ghost Shark capability is designed in Australia by Australian engineers, and we have an Australian factory that is beginning to produce Ghost Sharks at scale. And that will, subject to government approval, also be exported, or our commercial variant will be exported to our partners around the world.
So I might have some questions about export licensing, but basically this is pretty amazing. You've described what it does, and there's a factory building them in Sydney. There is what you said.
Exactly.
So one of the things I think that concerns Australians is that they hear about something might happen in Darwin. Well, there can be a little bit of, envy that all this money is going to Darwin, especially by older established sites. Darwin want more, Sydney wants more, Queensland wants more, Western Australia wants more. What is happening in New South Wales? I'm asking as a New South Wales senator, why did you choose there to actually undertake this project? How many small and medium enterprises are connected into it, and where are they distributed across the country?
The Ghost Shark is a capability that is world class. It really is world class, and it wasn't just the Deputy Prime Minister when he announced the signing of the $1.7 billion program of record saying that because we're Australian. It is, I think, justifiably something that we can feel proud of, because we were able to deliver the program collaboratively with Navy, DSTG and ASCA in 3 years that countries the size of America have been unable to deliver in 10 years. The US program has been 10 years in the making. They still don't have a boat in the water, and they have put 1.2 billion Australian dollars into it. So Australia has spent $140 million, $70 million from Anduril, $70 million from the Commonwealth, and we had the first boat in the water after 12 months, and we have completed the 3-year development program on budget and ahead of schedule, and we're commencing production of those systems now.
So we should be really proud of this.
We should be, absolutely. Australia
and I kind of think,
proud.
like the 50 metre in the pool, US versus Australia, we want to beat them every time.
Well, I think we want to cooperate with them. We want them to use our capability. It's a fantastic AUKUS capability. We have a lot of technology and support from our US business. We have support from our UK business. We have the question you asked around supply chain. We have over 42 Australian SMEs from every single state and territory in the country that are contributing to the Ghost Shark program. We've interviewed over 120 companies in order to get down to that 42 SMEs who are working for and with the program. I want to pay tribute to those SMEs. They have invested deeply into their own businesses off the back of a 5-year commitment that Anduril has been able to provide to those businesses so that they can literally, in many cases, take the deeds to their house to the bank and get a loan to reinvest into their business, which they could not do if they were only given a 1-year commitment or a 2-year commitment. So the 5-year contract has enabled them to invest into their own businesses, to employ hundreds and hundreds of people across that supply chain, in addition to our own 250 people. And we are really proud of that. We are working side by side, mentoring and supporting each of those companies. And sometimes it's not easy because these companies are not match fit yet, but they will be once they have the opportunity to invest into their business with the certainty and security of a 5-year contract from Anduril. And we're grateful to the government for the 5-year contract that they've given to us. We're just back-to-back that with our supply chain. So it is a truly national endeavour. Yes, the factory is in New South Wales, and why did we choose to put it in New South Wales was another one of your questions, Chair. Anduril is a software-first, hardware-enabled company. We produce physical products, and we get a lot of attention for the excitement attached to the physical product. But the first product that Anduril developed was a software operating system called Lattice. Now, Lattice is an open architecture operating system, and I emphasise open architecture because many of the traditional defence companies tend to be closed in their architecture, and hence the customer, the government, gets locked in, vendor locked into using that particular company. We started our company on the basis that we didn't want to do it the traditional way. We wanted to be a positive disruptor, and I emphasise positive in the disruptor sentence that I just mentioned, because we wanted to embrace the capabilities that were in the commercial sector. The reason for that is that the commercial sector tends to deliver capabilities at a much, much lower price point than the specific and bespoke defence sector can. We leverage off a lot of the investment, the R&D that's gone into capabilities in the private sector and the commercial sector. For instance, our power system, it's an electric system, the Go Shark, and so we've just leveraged off the autonomous vehicle, the electric vehicle market to all of the battery technology that they have spent tens of billions of dollars developing. We have used that technology, and we do that because we know that the technology, the evolution of the Go Shark has to be continuously updating and upgrading. So being a software-first company, the epicentre of software in Australia tends to be in the large capital cities like Sydney and Melbourne. We attract and then retain the best talent that is in this country, and we get that talent from a diverse range of places, from companies like SpaceX and Google and Atlassian and all of the great software companies in the world, particularly Palantir as well. And we give them the opportunity to work on capabilities that matter for the defence of our nation. And as a result of that, we based our first office in Sydney. We also have an office in Canberra, and we have a facility and an office in Melbourne as well. So we are growing as we need to, and we'd like to establish facilities in other states and territories around the country. And we're involved, as I said, in providing opportunities for other domains in defence, like, for instance, solid rocket motors, which the Guided Weapons and Explosive Ordnance group in defence are potentially about to announce to the market.
I'm going to go to the Deputy Chair, but on notice, could you fill out your recommendations, like with how you did that as a question on notice? So you talked about your close partnership, focusing on achieving the performance metrics, industry having skin in the game, need for planning and renewing the stated focus on speed to capability and risk-taking. Any further detail about the how that happened would be very helpful for the committee. So that's my questions on notice to you, which was also from Ms Templeman. I'm going to the Deputy Chair, Mr Boyce.
Thank you, Mr Goodrich. So I would like to hear your thoughts on what you think Australia requires in respect to defence capability. Obviously, we have learned, and everybody has learned from the Russia-Ukraine situation, that drone technology and shoulder-launched missile technology is extremely effective. It is extremely cheap. It is easy to reproduce and so forth. Very expensive hypersonic missiles and so forth, whilst they are very effective, they have an economic cost to them. Australia is an entirely different situation to many places around the world in respect to our geographic location. We have a lot of airspace around us and we have a lot of water space around us. If we are to invest heavily in small drone technology, small shoulder-launched missile technology and so forth, we are engaging a deterrent that has already landed. I want to hear your thoughts on what you think we should be doing in respect to developing technology that defeats a deterrent before it gets here. So stuff that's on the water or stuff that's in the air in terms of deterrent.
It's a fantastic question, and thank you for asking it. I think that it's absolutely unquestioned that the role of autonomous systems and drones and software-centred capabilities are going to play and need to play a much more prominent role in the arsenal that is available to every defence force around the world. We are of the view that we cannot afford to be shooting $5 million missiles at a $50,000 drone. That is something which is just economically impossible, even for a country the size of the United States, let alone for a country the size of Australia. So we have to be thinking of ways in which we can team the exquisite crewed capabilities with a range of different autonomous, cost-effective, easy-to-produce capabilities to get, colloquially speaking, much more bang for our defence buck. So if we are clever about the way in which we approach this, we can continue to invest in the crewed capabilities which the government and the department are investing into. These are critical capabilities, and I'm specifically referring to crewed submarines. You might expect that I would say that we do not need crewed submarines. I, in fact, believe that crewed submarines are fundamental to the defence of our nation. However, I think that investing in a large fleet of ghost sharks that can team with crewed capabilities is going to provide a significant deterrence to the adversaries who would seek to impact our national interests and our way of life. So I think that we need to invest in capabilities where we can produce them in Australia, because in the time of a conflict, a global conflict, our supply chains will be disrupted. We've seen what that looked like in a pandemic. A global conflict will make a pandemic look like a picnic. So we need to be prepared to be able to produce a range of capabilities in our country. We obviously can't produce everything in our country, so there's a set of strategies that we need to employ, which is partly about long lead buys and a supply chain driven investment. I'm thinking of things like long range weapons. I'm thinking of things like fuel supply. But then there are factories that we can build, and as I was saying in my prepared remarks, the factories of today are a deterrent for a country potentially deciding to try to take on Australia. If they know that we have the ability to produce capabilities en masse at scale, very economically, they may decide not today. And a conflict deterred is a conflict that is potentially one that may not happen. So my view of things is that we need to find a better balance between purchases of large amounts of sovereign capabilities like Ghost Shark and like other drones that we manufacture in Australia, and we need to make sure that we've got the right exquisite crewed capabilities that provide that level of deterrence that an uncrewed capability cannot. We are investing significantly around the world in massive facilities to produce capabilities that the Allies need. AUKUS is an opportunity. AUKUS Pillar 2 is an opportunity to work smarter together and to invest from the alliance's perspective, in one place to do one thing, another place to do another thing, but potentially distributed manufacturing of those things, no matter where they are developed, in all three countries. That's a smart way to use the alliance and the trust and the relationship that goes back decades and sometimes centuries, or a century, in a very compelling way that our adversaries do not have that luxury. So I think what we need to be thinking of is using the scarce resources that we have to get better bang for our buck.
Yeah. Just to build on that a little bit, I watched a program recently about the Second World War and why the Allies had air superiority in Europe. And it had nothing to do with strategy or how well you flew an aeroplane or so forth. It was industrial capability which won the war. If you apply that same scenario to modern-day warfare or perceived modern-day warfare, the people that you deal with, government departments, international allies, so forth and so forth, the need for industrial capability, to me, seems to be absolutely paramount in any defence capability. How do you feel Australia is positioned in respect to its industrial capability?
I think I can answer that question even more broadly, Deputy Chair, in saying that I think that even the United States is in a perilous state. The facts are that if a peer-to-peer conflict were to occur, the analysis by esteemed agencies in the United States would see the US running out of weapons inside of 8 or 10 days. And that's the United States. From Australia's perspective, I think we are in a very similar set of situations. And you're absolutely right. The reason that World War II was won was because the United States was able to outproduce its adversaries. They were able to retool their car-making factories to produce airplanes. They took the opportunity to not build exquisite airplanes, but to build airplanes that were good enough, and tanks that were good enough. They weren't as good as the German tanks, but they were good enough. And so the Americans arrived on the scene with a phenomenal industrial base behind them in World War II, and they were able to prevail. The statistics are that China has hundreds of times more shipbuilding capability than the United States does today. That is a huge concern. And America is seeing the era of that underinvestment, and they are turning around. I think Australia needs to learn from that as well, and to invest into industrial capability that would allow us to build vast quantities of weapons, vast quantities of capabilities that could be used in an ongoing sense, because a war will not be over in what modern warfare thinking has lulled us into a false sense of security and thinking that it won't be over in a couple of weeks. We've seen what's happened in Europe. Any conflict that starts is going to be a war of production, not necessarily a war where the most exquisite, the stealthiest capability will prevail.
Thank you, sir. Comprehensive answer.
Thank you very much. I think we have a question from Ms Phillips.
Thank you. Well, I was very lucky to see Ghost Shark at HMAS Creswell a little while ago. So I guess my question comes to testing of Ghost Shark and other autonomous undersea capability. And I know we've got the East Australian exercise area there off the coast, but what can the government do to invest in facilities, like you were talking about in the previous answer about ramping up that capability for Pillar 2 and autonomous undersea capability?
I've got to give credit to Defence. They do have a large number of programs and testing programs that industry is invited to participate in. As the committee has mentioned, we have vast areas of water around our continent and vast airspace. This is one of the reasons that Andrel chose to invest in Australia and partner with the Royal Australian Navy, DSTG and ASCA, is that we had a willing partner, but we also had an environment that would enable us to do what we need to do, which is to do a lot of testing and evaluation. We didn't just produce 3 Ghost Sharks in 3 years. We actually produced 4 Ghost Sharks in 3 years because Andrel invested in a 4th Ghost Shark on its own balance sheet, not part of the collaborative development program. And we airlifted that 4th Ghost Shark via a RAF C-17 to Hawaii, to RIMPAC last year. And then we on-shipped that ourselves to our West Coast test and evaluation facility. The reason we did that was because we wanted to double the amount of test and evaluation that we could do. We set up a whole nother team in our US parent company to get more sets and reps, as we call it, on the Ghost Shark to learn more. Because the earlier you get a capability into a test and evaluation program, the more that you can learn. And I'm actually proud to say that the engineering changes between the first Ghost Shark, the first prototype Ghost Shark, and the second one, they're not 3 identical Ghost Sharks. They are evolving capabilities. But the engineering difference between the Alpha, as we call it, that we put into the water 12 months ahead of schedule, and Bravo, the second one, was 50%. Yeah. And what that means is that we were able to use that accelerated test and evaluation program to improve the capability and outperform the objectives and the measures that the Royal Australian Navy set for us because we were able to do more and more testing. That is an ongoing part of the Ghost Shark program. We're not just producing dozens and dozens of Ghost Sharks all the same. There will be a rapid evolution and iteration of Ghost Shark as the Royal Australian Navy sets the pathway for capability. There'll be new payloads that go into Ghost Shark that deal with the threats that the Navy is confronting. And so the Ghost Shark will always be on the cutting edge and ahead of the threats that will be continuously changing. And that's the magic. The magic is you've got to get your capability into the hands of the warfighter and you've got to continually iterate and improve it. And that's the way that we will win.
Did you have a question, Ms. Slattery?
Oh, yeah. Well, no.
I do. I have a question and 2 requests. Just before I ask it, I just want to declare for the record that in our previous lives, Mr. Goodrich and I negotiated a defence acquisition contract on opposite sides of the table. So I just declare that for the sake of good order. Mr. Goodrich, my 2 requests. The Chair has requested on notice for you to outline how you think the 4 recommendations could be achieved. And in relation to the first one, which was that collaboration, trust, broad partnership, could you also address who had to drive that? Who was the driver of that? Was that industry, Andrew, or was Defence totally on board with that?
I can answer that now if you'd like. I think it's a great question.
Sure.
We've got enough time. We're running close to the wind, but anyway, off you go.
It's just a great question. And for the record, I was on the Commonwealth side of that negotiation. So
I was on the industry side.
Because in my previous life, I had the privilege of negotiating Commonwealth contracts for the taxpayer. And it was a very nice negotiation. So thank you so much. To be totally fair, it was a full collaborative spirit. And that is a core part of the success of the Ghost Shark program, that all of the partners work together from a governance perspective, from the CEO and 2-star level, down through the working level, down to the working groups. There was a strong governance process and an honest and open desire to do things that were in the best interests of the program. The Chief of Navy even established a set of performance criteria 6 months after the contract had been signed that were not part of the contract. We thought those were things that were absolutely correct. The Chief of Navy, Vice Admiral Mark Hammond, had identified areas that needed to be included in the program. So we included them in the program. They cost an enormous amount of money more than we had budgeted for the program, but we did not charge $1 more. The reason for that was that was the right answer. The Chief of Navy had come up with exactly the right criteria that needed to be met, and so we did that. We did not seek an extension of time.
To a less capitalised company?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Right.
Definitely, yeah.
So can you give your thoughts to how that might be addressed? Where risk is aligned? Like, what does a basic structure look like? Because I think you've opened up a really important...
It's a great question.
A really important part of what the challenges are.
How can we scale this across industry?
And how can other companies have a facility that when it becomes clear to Defence that this needs to be reshaped, that there's an adaptive capacity without it being, add-on extra for pure profit and just, having a bit of a go because you can and you think it's, free money because it's the government's. To avoid that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the answer to that question is that not every company can be in the defence industry. It takes a certain scale and capital structure to be able to serve such an important customer. I know that's probably not going to be a very popular answer, but it is the truth. And companies that are undercapitalised and choose or want to work in the defence space, I think are taking a huge risk onto their own balance sheets and probably into the owners' lives. A company like Anduril that is prepared to spend its own money to raise its own capital. We've raised in excess of $8 billion over the last 8 years. The company is valued in excess of $32 billion today, has the right amount of scale to take those risks and to make those bets. We do this across all of our capabilities. We invest into the development of a capability that we believe is important to the Department of Defence in whatever nation that we're working on. Then we put that capability into the hands of the customer and they use the capability and give us really valuable feedback. Our view is that if that product is good, the customer will buy it. And that's what I said in my opening remarks, in that if a company takes the risk and their investors are prepared to back them to take that risk, they have to be rewarded by having a commercially scalable contract at the end so that that risk can be paid back to the investors. Where I think we have fallen down in Australia is that we innovate exceptionally well, and that's hard to do, but at-scale manufacturing is about 1,000 times harder than innovation. And unless there is a scalable, a commercial scale contract at the end, you cannot afford to take the $60 million risk like we did and build the factory if you don't have confidence that there's going to be a contract that can justify that. So I'd like to have an answer as to how this can be scaled across small to medium enterprise. I don't know there really actually is an answer that is one that I think everybody wants to hear, that you do A, then you do B, then you do C, and suddenly you've got a solution. The real solution is to make sure that you are, as a company, properly capitalised in order to be able to confront and successfully navigate those vicissitudes of change, because there will inevitably be change along the way.
So on notice, you indicated the PGPA Act, the Commonwealth Procurement Practices and the fear of an ANAO audit breaks. There's a reason there breaks, because there are people who try to have a loan of the government, and that can happen at scale and it can happen in smaller ways. In place of that, I think you propose capability as service, yes, as a model. Now, we have run out of time to take evidence on the record today, but could I ask you to sort of flesh out what your concerns would look like if PGAPA, Commonwealth Procurement or ANAO audit got into the middle of the process that you've described for us today, what that would look like, critical points of interruption, what would occur, and then what does capability as a service, as a robust, transparent and accountable to the Australian people model of procurement really look like? that would be great.
Is Go Shark aligned with minimum viable capability, or is it top class? The good enough.
OIC is the capability of Go Shark.
Yeah. Was that the strategy with Go Shark, or is it?
I think
gold
Go
standard?
Shark as a capability is world class. So it's not minimum viable capability, it's actually exceptional capability. It's cutting edge capability, but it's only going to continue to evolve and improve. In terms of minimum viable capability from a production perspective, we're probably on the limit of it not being commercially viable, but we expect that there will be export opportunities for us and our supply chain and Andrew Australia that will make it rewarding for our shareholders.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. I want to thank all the witnesses from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute and Andrew Australia for coming this evening. You have been asked to provide a little additional information. If possible, to provide that to the Secretary by Friday the 5th of November, we would really appreciate it. You'll also be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence, and you'll have an opportunity to request corrections on any transcription errors.
Just a point of clarity, 5th of December, not November? Because I think we're past that.
Yeah, sorry, 5th of December, November, it says here, but
great.
actually, we just choose a month, and I think December might be appropriate, all right? Could I thank the committee and all the members who've attended, witnesses for their time this evening, for our Secretariat and Broadcasting and Hansard for their contribution to making this a public inquiry in the interest of the nation with regard to the defence of this great place we call home. Thank you very much, Mr Goodrich. I declare the public hearing closed.